welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my April wrap-up. In April, I read 8 books and I was really enjoying a lot of the stuff that I read. All of them are, well, most of them are relatively short books. So page count wise, I didn't read a lot, but you know, quality over quantity, I really enjoyed a lot of the things that I was reading in April. I did, however, have 3 DNFs, and part of why I was just like really DNFing books if I wasn't feeling them was because I was enjoying so many of the other books that I read this month that I just was like, I don't want anything to bring me down. I just want to like ride this high of like enjoying my reading. Yeah, and some of these were real surprises to me. So first up, for my DNFs, I have The Palace of Illusions by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. I also have Lost in the Never Woods by Aidan Thomas. And finally, Savage Her Reply by Deirdre Sullivan. And as always, I will be talking more in depth about these DNFs and like why I DNF'd them in my seasonal DNF video for the spring, which will be coming out in June. So yeah, I'll talk more about those later. Then let's get into the books that I did complete in April. So the first book that I finished this month was Sherwood by Megan Spooner. This is a standalone YA Robin Hood retelling. And this book, I was not really sure how I was going to feel about it because I am always intrigued by Robin Hood retellings, but I don't always enjoy them. And then also, this book doesn't have great reviews. Like in general, I feel like I've mostly seen either negative or pretty lukewarm reviews, but I do know, I went into it knowing that Kara from Wild Book Garden really liked this book, so that made me a little more optimistic about it, and I ended up really enjoying this. So in this, so the book starts out with Robin, who is the Lord of Locksley. So this is taking the version of Robin Hood in which he is, you know, a nobleman, and he's the Lord of Locksley. So he is in like fighting in the war in the Holy Land, and the first thing that happens in this book is that Robin dies. And then we jump to Marian's perspective and we see her finding out about his death and grieving. And then part of her like grieving process, creating this figure of Robin Hood as like a protector for the people of Locksley because she feels very connected to them because she had been betrothed to Robin. Yeah, and so we're following her through her like grieving for Robin and then accidentally becoming Robin Hood, and trying to like hide her identity, and like a lot of the, you know, it hits a lot of the regular like Robin Hood beats, but I think it also does a lot of new things with it, which I really liked. And I don't know, I felt like this was such an interesting way to start a book because at the start of the book, it just throws us immediately into Marian's grief. And we don't, like, that's how we get to know the character. We don't know Marian's character. We don't know Robin of Locksley. We don't really know that much about their relationship. And so we're learning about this character and their relationship through her grieving, and then through some like brief flashbacks where we get to see like how they met when they were children and like them, you know, growing up together and how they feel about each other and stuff like that. But they're just like these very brief flashbacks that are interspersed. But I just felt like it was so well done. I felt like the flashbacks worked really well. Like they were just enough that they didn't take away from the, you know, like thrust of the main story, but they really gave me a feel for these characters and their relationship, and I felt very invested in it, and it really like captivated me right away. The first part of the book was definitely my favorite. I think that it dragged a little bit in the middle because there was a point where she was kind of like floundering a little bit because she kind of becomes Robin Hood accidentally. And so there's a point where she is sort of like floundering, which is understandable, but it did make the plot drag a little. But I did really like the characters. There is a romance that develops in this. I do wish that maybe we had gotten like a tiny bit more time spent on that romance, but I still was like very, very into it. I was enjoying it. I also can see people not liking the way the book ends, and I've seen in some reviews that people really dislike the ending of the book. I can understand why, but I disagree with people's reasoning. Obviously, I don't want to like spoil it, but I think that the ending makes a lot of sense for this character and her motivations and where she is in life and like all of her circumstances and everything. So I was totally fine with it. I think I'm planning to do a review, like a full review for this book, but I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. The next book that I finished in April was Sister Song by Lucy Holland. This was my most anticipated release for the first half of the year. This is a standalone historical fantasy set in 6th century Britain. We're following 3 siblings who are the children of a king, and in their land is kind of being invaded both physically and spiritually. So they're being invaded physically by the Saxons, who are trying to take over their land, but they also feel like they are being kind of invaded spiritually because Christianity is coming into the country and kind of getting a foothold, and kind of trying to push out the old ways and the old religion and old gods, and disconnecting the people from the land, because this family does have a special connection to the land that gives them like magical powers that allows them to protect their land and their people, and that connection is weakening as Christianity is gaining more traction. So we're following these 3 siblings as they are dealing with that, but then also trying to kind of figure out what their lives are going to be in the future, and figuring out who they're going to be and what their roles are going to be. So the oldest sibling, she is kind of afraid that she'll never find love, and she's looking for love. The youngest sister is looking for adventure and feels very overlooked and discounted by other people. And then the middle sibling was assigned female at birth but is trans and wants to be acknowledged as their parents' son. But overall, I enjoyed this book. The first third of it dragged a little bit and was a little hard to get into, but then a third of the way in, the story I think kind of starts to take shape a little bit more. Some new characters are introduced and it starts to like move forward a little bit more. And also, if you're familiar with the ballad that it is a retelling of, then you'll start to see like that story also starting to take shape about a third of the way in, which I don't think I mentioned that this is a retelling of a traditional murder ballad called The Trois Sisters. Being a murder ballad, you know it's gonna end badly, and so it's kind of like watching a train wreck that you just can't look away from. So even if it's kind of obvious how things are gonna go wrong, I was still very like invested in watching it all unfurl. And also so the first half of the book took me a little while to get through, but once I got halfway through the book, I read the entire second half of the book in one day and stayed up to like 5 a.m. reading it, because I just was like, well, now I have to see, like I have to watch this whole thing play out, even though I know what's going to happen. So it definitely did grip me a lot more in the second half. There were some things about the retelling that I felt like didn't quite actually fit into the story. There's kind of the thing that's sort of the twist or the climax of the original ballad that ended up feeling like it didn't quite suit the rest of the story, and like maybe should have been left out, but if it had been, then it wouldn't really have been a retelling of this story. So I felt kind of conflicted about that. I don't know. This one, there were definitely complaints that I had about it, but I also ended up really enjoying it. And as I said, like the second half, I just like couldn't put it down, and I just had to like binge the second half of the book and see like how everything played out. I am planning to do a full review for this book, which I have not filmed yet or even really written out my notes for yet. So I feel like I haven't fully gathered my thoughts and feelings about this, so this may not be the clearest review of it, but hopefully by the time I do that review, I'll be a little more clear on how I feel about this book. But I ended up giving this 4 stars. Then I read an entire series of novellas, which was the Tencerit series by Neon Yang. So the first book is The Black Tides of Heaven. The second book is The Red Threads of Fortune. The third book is The Descent of Monsters, and the fourth book is The Ascent to Godhood. So this is an adult fantasy series of novellas that is considered silk punk. So it is set in a East Asian inspired fantasy world where they have magic, but they also are developing technology like guns and explosives and other things like that. And this takes place in the Protectorate. They are ruled by the Protector, who's kind of like a dictator. There's a magic that is called the Slack, and the people who are able to use this magic are tensors. And the magic, or the ability to use the magic, is really only taught to like the nobility and the upper classes. But there is a rebellion brewing among the common people, and they are developing technology. Their rebellion is called the Mechanists, and they are developing technology as a way to give themselves power to fight back against the tensors and this magic. And so we're following different characters in every book. This series, I feel like, is very hard to describe just because each book is very different. And also this series is very unlike anything else that I've read. But in some of the books we are following some of the children of the Protector, and then in some of the other books we're just following other characters who are related to this like mechanist rebellion. And so we're getting to see it from like all of these different perspectives. This world is so interesting, and I really want to know more about this world. There isn't a lot about the world that's very explained. There are a lot of things that are just kind of stated about it, and then there's no explanation given. Like at one point we find out that there's some place in this world where they have half gravity, and then nothing else is said about it. Like, there's no explanation for why part of the world has half gravity. So it's things like that. There are also dinosaurs in this world, and there are also Naga, who are these like flying magical serpents. They're like, it's just, there's like such a combination of different things, and it's so creative, and as I said, not like anything else that I've read. And it's so interesting, and I really want to know more about this world. The thing that I think really like draws me into these books, one is I think the writing is really lovely. I really loved the writing in this. It's very beautiful. I think, as I said, the world is really interesting, so I always was wanting to like know more about it, and like, you know, I just hung on to any bit of world building that I got about this. But really the characters, I just really loved and felt for them. And one of my favorite things when I read a novella is when someone is able to like build character and get you invested in characters in such a short book. Because I always say, like, I'm more of a long book kind of person who wants to just like sit there for like 500 pages with one character and really get to know them. But I think that Neon Yang does such a good job of just pulling you into these characters and their feelings and their relationships so quickly that you just feel for them. And I especially loved the way that they wrote like familial relationships. So I really loved this series. I gave the first book 4 stars, the second book 4.5 stars. This was my favorite in the series, but from watching and reading reviews, it seems like for a lot of people this was their least favorite, but I loved it. And the third book I gave, I think, 4 stars, and the fourth one I gave 3.5 stars. Anyways, I've already talked about this way too much. I'm going to be doing a series review for this to ramble about it even more because I loved this. But yeah, I think that this might end up on like one of my like favorite books or series of the year. I don't know. I really adored this. I really hope that this author writes more in this world because it's such an interesting world, and I just want to know more about it, and I want to know what happens after the events of this series. Anyway, So I loved these. Then the next book that I finished was Stalking Darkness by Lynn Llewellyn. This is the second book in the Night Runner series, which I'm reading as part of the Scala Along. This is an adult fantasy series that is following these two like gentlemen spies slash thieves slash other things as they are using their skills to help protect the kingdom and the world in some cases and prevent evil things from happening or evil things from coming back to life, I guess. And they also have a slow burn romance over the course of the series. So yeah, this is the second one. I actually have been listening to them as audiobooks and then just like reading some passages in the physical book and stuff like that. And overall, like so far, I'm feeling pretty neutral about this series. I do really enjoy the characters in this. I really like our two main characters, Alec and Sergel. I like their relationship and the slow burn of the two of them. I think that this one had a more cohesive plot than the first book, which I liked because that first one was like kind of meandering, but this one did more like specific things that I did not like, and some of them were just kind of like, that's kind of weird, all the way to things that I'm like, that's actually a problem. So some things that were just kind of weird. There's a very, you know, brief minor scene that involves like breast milk and apples, and it was a weird scene that I didn't like, and it was kind of off-putting, and it was weird that it was like, why are we sexualizing a woman who is just like breastfeeding her child? And I think it was supposed to be part of this like other characters like sexual awakening or something, but it was really weird and unnecessary, and I was like, I don't like this. There's also a weird scene where one of the characters goes to like a remote mountain village, and the people of the village are just like, please sleep with all of our daughters because it's an honor for them to get pregnant by a stranger. And it doesn't like explicitly show him like having sex with them, but then he like wakes up in a bed surrounded by satisfied women. And it was just like, why? It was just really weird, and it was irrelevant to the story. And I just was like, why did this happen? And then there are two things that was more like, these are actually like problems. One of them is that one of the main characters in this is sexually assaulted. So a woman uses magic on him so that he is kind of out of it and to like manipulate him, and it's not addressed in this pretty much at all. I didn't like that that was completely like glossed over and not addressed, and also the fact that the sexual assault was very irrelevant to the plot. It was unnecessary and didn't need to happen. So I was like, it didn't need to happen, and then you just completely ignored it. So why even have this happen in the first place? And then the other thing that I had a problem with was that there is a character in this that uses a anti-Semitic trope. So there is this person who is one of the bad guys, and his name, I think his name is like Ashnazi or something like that. But his name is spelled almost exactly the same as the word Ashkenazi, which is a name commonly used to refer to German Jews. I'll put his name and the word Ashkenazi on the screen so you can see how similar the spelling is. But his character is that he is an evil necromancer who does blood magic and like human sacrifice, which is a problem. And so that was something that I also really didn't like about this. So right now I'm kind of debating whether I want to continue reading the series. That character, as far as I can tell, is not going to be in the rest of the series. But like, considering that I'm feeling very lukewarm about the series, and then it had that trope and it just didn't handle the sexual assault well, and there are other things, I don't know. There are things about this that I was not a fan of, and I've been feeling very lukewarm about other things. So at the moment, I think I am going to try reading the third book to see how I feel about it, and if I get more into it. But yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to be continuing the series or not. And then the final book that I finished in April was Illumination, Poetry to Light Up the Darkness by Tyler Knott Gregson. So this is a poetry collection. This is the newest release. It just came out, I think, in April. And Tyler Knott Gregson is a poet that I really enjoy. I think I've at this point read all of his published poetry collections. I think there's one book that's not like a poetry collection, it's more like a workbook thing, I don't know, that I have but haven't read yet. Anyways, so this is his most recent one. I don't really rate or review poetry, so I don't have a lot to say about this. This is not my favorite one from this poet, but I still enjoyed it because I just generally enjoy his poetry. So that is all for my April wrap-up. Talk to me in the comments, especially if you've read any of these books. I'd love to chat with you about them. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!